Hello, friends. One of the temptations that we could be facing these days is despair or hopelessness. And it's the lie that happiness is meant to be found in something here on earth, wherein we know that our true and lasting happiness comes from God alone and the salvation of our soul. And we as Christians are not immune to this sort of temptation. We're not immune to falling for the lie that happiness depends on what I have or who I am before others. You see, we as Christians also face the reality that we can carry around a general faith in God, in principle, but in practice we don't live it out. In practice we make choices for things that are not God in place of God. And so we need to recognize that if we are placing our happiness in earthly things, even naturally good things like health or a long life, that God might be using this moment to hit the reset button, so to speak, to remind us that if we build our lives on sand, meaning that we place our hope in earthly things, that when the rain and floods come, or in our case, when a contagious disease catches us by surprise, great will be the fall of that house. We know, as the gospel tells us, that we're called to build our houses on rock, on where true and lasting happiness is found. And that rock, St. Paul reminds us, is Christ. Christ is our hope. Christ has truly come as man among us to show us what a real human life is meant to be. It's meant to be lived placing our ultimate happiness in communion with God, living for Him and through Him each and every day. So if you're being faced right now with the temptation to fall into despair or hopelessness, do the opposite. Turn that moment of temptation into a moment of prayer. Instead of falling for despair or hopelessness, turn to hope. Make an act of hope. We've included in the description below this video an act of hope that you can make and learn in these days. Or maybe that temptation is meant to become a moment of new resolution, wherein you can recognize that what I've been dependent upon for my happiness, that thing that I think I have to have, or who I need to be before others, maybe it's time, with a firm resolution and the help of God's grace, it's time to detach ourselves of that thing. Turn back to God with all of our hearts, and with all our hope, and with all of our trust. You know, I'm finding that the words of Venerable Fulton Sheen in these days are certainly timeless. And in 1950, in an article for the Ottawa Citizen, he wrote this: "Economics is a tangled mess. Lives have been made flabby with worldliness and ill-prepared for the rigors of an enforced discipline. Platitudes abound on lips and unrealized desires in bitter hearts. Everywhere there is confusion, hopelessness, and despair. And yet there need not be such hopelessness and despair. The world seemed just as hopeless before when it crucified its Savior, and yet with all its paganism and nationalism, it arose to newness and freshness of Christian life and civilization. The miracle of the resurrection can happen again." We want to remind you that we are praying for you here at the seminary. God love you, and God bless you.